So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face unhappy, downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must learn to rule over it." Genesis 4, verse 7. This is the second in a sense-making sub-series, setting some foundational thoughts, ideas in place for the quote I want to refer to and for the application I want to make out of it all to our situation as a denomination. In the first, I outlined systems thinking, or a systems approach to understanding the dynamics of human groups. I also talked about how anxiety can negatively affect the system. This posting introduces what I understand of Rene Girard's mimetic theories and how it leads to scapegoating. The third will hopefully bring it home, and then there might be a fourth follow-up or application one after that, the way things are shaping. I know Rene Girard for two theories of human cultural behavior: mimetics, or in my words, imitation desiring what the other has, making them rivals, and for his description of scapegoating. He illustrates both of them using Bible stories, though he discovered them, he says, studying literature and mythology. Wikipedia has a good short explanation, which I'll read here and copy into the printed version, slightly modified. In mimetic theory, mimesis refers to human desire, the product of a mimetic process in which people imitate models who they see endowing value onto things or actions. Girard calls this phenomenon mimetic desire, and described mimetic desire as the foundation of his theory, which reads as follows: "Man is the creature who does not know what to desire, and he turns to others in order to make up his mind. We desire what others desire because we imitate their desires." End of quote. So that's two short sentences that are his main theory. Mimetic desire is found in the relationship between Cain and Abel. Both wanted the same thing: God's approval or God's favor. They were imitative rivals in the seeking of this approval. They both make offerings. One got it and one did not. And I'm not going to go into why that happened, but the story makes clear that one got it and one did not. The rivalry led to the first murder. Abel was the first sacrificial victim of mimetic rivalry. Advertising works with mimetic desire, whether they understand Girard's theory or not. It certainly works on the same principle. We are shown a product, and people around that product having fun or otherwise benefiting, can I say finding favor, and this generates in us the desire to have that same product and experience and favor. Professional sport works on mimetic desire. Again, whether they know the theory or not, they know this works. We watch someone who is great at their sport and, in brackets, has lots of advertising sponsorships, and we want to be like that person, or we want to be associated with them or their skills. So we imitate the way they do their shooting, the way they do their sport. Or we want to be associated with their team. And so we buy team merchandise to feel the association. We ask for signatures and autographs to feel connected, because that feels just a little more personal. And I could go on. But those are two good ways of illustrating mimetic desire in action. I experimented around this with children one time. In a play area for children, you can be sure that there will be a child who will want to play with something another child is currently enjoying. Even though there are many options waiting to be played with, the child will want that toy that is currently in enjoyed use. Part of the journey of parenting, but also of growing in wisdom, not only as a parent but as a child, is to learn to deal with that kind of situation. Usually these days we turn that kind of situation into a teaching moment about sharing. Well, we all have to learn to share, Bobby. Okay, that was a little too sarcastic. It is true, we do need to learn to share, and children need to learn how that works. One time when one of my own children was in the situation I just described and looked to me to do something about this child that was trying to take away the toy he was using, I said, let him have it. And I wasn't talking violence there. I was saying, let him have the toy. Trust me, I'll show you something. And then I said, go and seem really interested in that toy over there and pretend to be really enjoying it. Sure enough, the pesky child, following mimetic desire, presumed the second toy was indeed more interesting than the first, and came and claimed it, grabbed it away, leaving the original object of desire unused. I thought I could see the frustration in that second child, the child that was not mine, in his trying to understand why the toy did not entertain him immediately as it seemed to have done for my son. Meanwhile, my son learned a lesson I saw him use again later. He had learned how mimetic desire works and creates conflict, and how to redirect that, or how to avoid it at least. And it's a version of sharing, I'm going to argue. Rene Girard discovered the mimetic pattern in classic literature and I suppose mythology as well, but it certainly was, his examples are from classic literature. This is one of his skills. He's good at identifying patterns, and because he wasn't, I'm going to say, classically trained, he kind of self-developed, which was frustrating to the academy because he didn't fit careful niches. He was what they call a polymath, and he didn't stay within the boundaries of just sociology or just philosophy or just history or just literature. And all his teaching and writing bridged many categories. He had this skill at identifying patterns and then asking questions about them. He found that it often happened in literature, in stories, that a person was in love with another, yet they are in a situation where they're not quite sure if the love is reciprocated, if the love is coming back to them. So the one in love asks a close friend, usually the stories are a male and male, and the male is in love with the female. The one in love asks a friend to go in and try and woo that person to see how strong or weak the love for them is. And the friend now falls in love as well. Various variations of that. And now we have what's called mimetic rivalry again. And we know, because there's many country western songs written about this and other songs and poems, we know there's going to be someone in pain out of that. I first encountered Girard in the early 2000s on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's program called Ideas. Right from the start, in fact, I think I was switching channels on the car radio. Right from the start, I was drawn by his French accent. I love his French accent. And if I'd listened to some of it recently, I would try to imitate it, but it's been a while. And also, as a person interested in human relational behavior and the Bible as narrative, I was enthralled as I listened to the content of what he said. I was enthralled by it. I own an official paid-for cassette recording of that original program. I was not a person of means in that time, but I ordered these tapes so that I could hear it again. This is before podcasting and internet releases. The program has since been redone and rebroadcast and is available on the internet. And I have a link in my written version of this that you could follow. But you could also just search CBC Ideas and then Rene Girard or Scapegoat, and it should come up. Want to be clear that I make no claim to fully understanding Girard's thought. So take what I'm describing as my best understanding. It's kind of why I'm leaning on Wikipedia a little bit as well, just so that I'm not misconstruing what he stands for. Because the reality is that some of it I still don't fully understand the mimetic theory, at least when he goes deeper and deeper into it and its application. What I am sure of is that Girard's theories have huge implications for relational life in general, for group life, like congregational life or any kind of a group, and for Christian living. Let me insert a random bonus factoid that will be of interest to Kuyperians. In 1985, Rene Girard received his first honorary degree from the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. Boy, that was bad Dutch on my part. The Free University in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Several others honorary degrees followed. That feels like some kind of a connection for us Reformed folk. Now, a more complex version or application of mimetic theory, mimetic rivalry, goes to larger groups, not just individuals or a couple of individuals. This one is desire for what another has and thereby creating competition for it. He refers to as mimetic contagion. And here I'm going to switch to the language of systems and anxiety from my last video and post, 8a, to describe and explain this. When any group is experiencing some kind of discomfort, for example, a drought, or poor harvest, poor crops, or, more relevant to us or more fresh in our memory, a pandemic, or there's an unsolved murder in the community where murders rarely, if ever, happen. Or, to apply it to a church, there's a decline in worship attendance or in giving or something like that. When these kinds of discomforts happen, stresses, the system tends to get agitated. And in that agitation, everyone wants the same thing. They want the problem resolved, and yesterday, and soon. This is the wellspring of much mythology and cultural religion for Girard. This becomes a religious, sacred moment, though often only later when it's made part of folk memory. In group desperation to find a way out of the anxiety, the group begins to search for something or someone to blame. This is where, in the old westerns, the mayor or the sheriff is addressing the crowd about some problem that's creating anxiety in the system, and suddenly someone says, "There he is! He's the one!" And the crowd turns on the individual, and a lynching happens without a trial if law and order does not take charge again, does not prevail. This is the kind of moment today where the media, speaking for the anxious crowd, demands an arrest yesterday, demands a culprit, demands someone be accused. And there are many stories of people being falsely accused out of that pressure that the police force succumbs to, just to calm the crowds. When whatever is done, the community feels safe again. Normal has returned. I should say normal. And some kind of peace, or at least lack of anxiety, is restored. Girard says that the person sacrificed, especially in cultures where they might even volunteer for it, or it's actually considered a privilege to be the one sacrificed, that person is often deified, made sacred in the mythology of the stories that are created out of that event. There was a time in our history when we had a severe drought, and a young boy came forward and said, "The gods have told me that if you do away with me, if you sacrifice me, the rains will come." And so they do, and it happens. And the boy becomes a hero in the mythology, that kind of thing. So there you have the scapegoat pattern. Anxiety rises in the system, and the system desperately wants to return to peace, which is really just life as status quo normal. So the collective unrest picks a victim to sacrifice. What they want to return to sometimes is a nostalgified version of the past. When the mechanism of such contagion infects a congregation, churches or councils or boards will fire the janitor, fire the administrator, or send away, disown some oddball person who's sort of on the social outs anyway, so let's dismiss them. Or they will get rid of the pastor. You see, congregations know they need to live with each other forever, most of them. But pastors can be sent out of Dodge and exchanged for a fresh one, so people can feel relief from the contagion. All of that is mimetic contagion at work in a church. And pastors actually need to understand this is what's going on if they find themselves scapegoated. Otherwise, it can be very, very discouraging and confusing and troubling. So here's how what I've just described is described on Wikipedia. In Girard's view, it is humankind, not God, who has need for various forms of atoning violence. Humans are driven by desire for that which another has or wants. This causes a triangulation of desire and results in conflict between the desiring parties or within the desiring parties. The mimetic contagion increases to a point where the entire society is at risk or feels at risk. And it's at this point that the scapegoat mechanism is triggered. This is the point where one person is singled out as the cause of the trouble. It can also be one tribe, one group, one type of person, and is expelled or killed by the group. This person is the scapegoat. And as the scapegoat is taken care of, social order is restored or feels restored as people are contented that they have solved the cause of their problems by removing the scapegoated individual. And this is what Girard figured out. The cycle resets and begins again until the next anxiety in the system. The key word here is contented or content. It creates this pattern, a contentment. So that's the end of referring to Wikipedia. That contentedness achieved by this human cultural pattern is actually a lie, a deception. In fact, in I See Satan Fall, Girard very clearly ties it to the powers and principalities of Satan. And that makes sense. It's a lie, a deception, a non-biblical, non-Christian solution to anxiety in the system. So what does that say if a church practices it and gets rid of their pastor because of their anxiety? It says they're not following, they haven't understood the gospel. So it's a false relief, a false contentment that is created. Usually the human situation that contributed to the anxiety and triggered the scapegoat mechanism has not changed, as in the example of a church's membership or attendance dropping, which could be because the people in the church are not kind, or the worship is not done well, or some other thing that really has very little to do with the pastor. Scapegoating a pastor will not solve that underlying systemic issue. This is where I get a phrase that I use in my specialized transitional ministry work, where I say, because often I'll come into a situation and there will be people who will want to just move on because the problem is gone, they'll say, especially if it was staff or pastors and they're all gone, and people will think, oh, we could just carry on, call another pastor and carry on. And then it feels like my job to say, but you created the conditions for the problems that you had that caused you to feel like you had to get rid of those people. So my job is to help you look at those conditions and see if something can be done about them in order to prevent this from repeating. So the Bible tells us about scapegoating. And it uses an actual goat, and this is the source of the word. It's kind of a problematic word that, I think if I remember right, it's not found anywhere else. And it has, the word implies it has something to do with taking away. This example is found in the Old Testament story in Deuteronomy 16 of Aaron the priest selecting 2 goats. One to be a blood sacrifice to atone for the sin of the people, and the other to carry, figuratively, you could say, or even literally, the sin of the people away from where they lived, outside of the camp, outside of the residence area. And that goat would ceremonially have the blame for Israel's sin laid on its head. And then it would be chased out into the wilderness, never to return. And the people would have peace until another sacrifice and scapegoat was needed because the sin had begun building up again. Here's an aside that I found funny that I came across at one point researching that Bible passage. There's a story from outside of the Bible which claims that there was a time when the scapegoat came back into the town or the village or the city, much to the consternation of the people. I can imagine it as a movie scene and the anxiety that it would create. So from then on, the story goes, a person was always appointed to take the goat far into the wilderness and, because I don't like describing violence, I'll just say, do something to make sure it never came back. This biblical scapegoat is a great archetype. It functions slightly differently than the mimetic contagion one. This biblical scapegoat is a great archetype, as they say, a great foreshadowing pattern to prepare for what Jesus eventually does in willingly becoming a blood sacrifice who takes away the sin of the world, never for it to return. He turns the principalities' favorite pattern back on them, jujitsu style. And that's where I will begin the next video. So, God spoke to Cain. Why this tantrum? Why this sulking? If you do well, won't you be accepted? And if you don't do well, watch out. Sin is lying in wait for you, ready to pounce. It's out to get you. You've got to learn to master it.